direct from the web, it's Billy Masters, live. And now, please welcome your host, Billy Masters.
Oh my God, where was I? Monica's asleep at the switch. You know, that's the problem with an engineer that drinks. Yes, you. Anyway, welcome to the show. I am, of course, your host, Billy Masters, and today is, well, now they're right on the switch. Thursday, November 18th, 2021. So a programming note to begin with. Next week is Thanksgiving, and last year, we didn't plan on doing a show, and because we were in the middle of the pandemic, a lot of people had emailed me saying that they were sad that there wasn't going to be a show because they couldn't travel and they were alone for Thanksgiving. And so Charles Busch and I just did an impromptu show that day just to keep people company. And also, as it turned out, we were alone. And, but you know, now everyone is off doing their own things, and I'm not doing a show. That's the thing. There is no show next Thursday. So I wanted to just let everyone know that. So today's show, I was telling my guests backstage, has kind of been put together because of one of my guests. The last week's show was our 100th show, and I really kind of wanted to kick off the second 100. There will not be another 100 shows. I'm just telling you right now. I can predict that. But the next 100, nonetheless, 101st show, with people who I really liked and really thought would be good chemistry together. And the last time Michael Riedel was on this show, he had said, you know, the next time you do a panel show, I'd really like to be on with Bruce Vilanch. So, of course, I said, Bruce, want to talk to Riedel? And he's like, I love Riedel. And that's where the show came from. And then, of course, there's Charles Busch, who, you know, fits into any group. And because I'm not going to be here with him next week for Thanksgiving, I thought, why not have him this week? So I'm going to start with Michael Riedel. So Michael Riedel is a co-host on New York City radio station WOR, theater columnist for the New York Post, former host of the television show Theater Talk, and author of two fantastic books that if you're looking for a holiday gift for a theater person, Razzle Dazzle, The Battle for Broadway, and Singular Sensation, The Triumph of Broadway. They are extraordinary books. And they're the kind of books that I like because you can go back and read a specific chapter, or you can just read a section. You can go back and use it as a reference book. It's something that sits on my bedside. And I am pleased to welcome Michael Riedel back to Billy Masters Live.
Hey, Billy, how are you? Good to be with you.
I'm great, Michael. Great to have you here. You know, 3 people asked me recently, and so I'm going to start with this because we didn't cover it last time you were here. Why are you no longer on Theater Talk?
Well, Susan Haskins and I did that show, I think...
How many years?
25 years.
Oh, my God.
And things do run their course. And I was kind of eager to move on and try other things, particularly the radio. I got involved with Imus and the Imus in the Morning show when I was covering that gigantic Broadway hit, Spider-Man. And Imus started to bring me on as a regular panelist, and then he gave me a weekly segment. And then I wound up getting a radio show on another station in New York. And I just felt there was too much on my plate with writing books and doing the column and then getting involved in the radio. And I really had felt that I'd done my time at Theater Talk. So when I got the job as the morning radio show host on WOR, I thought I got to concentrate on this. You know, this is a 4-hour live show every morning, and that takes a lot out of you. So I departed Theater Talk, and I'm happy to say it only lasted 6 months after I left.
Isn't that nice when that happens?
It is. True.
I mean, we don't wish anyone bad, but it does really speak to your importance to the show. Is it something that you miss because you were very good at it?
You know, I do believe things are fun for a long, long time. And we had a blast on Theater Talk. Mm-hmm. And we started with nothing. I mean, we never made any money. The whole thing was a nonprofit.
Of course.
We started on Channel 69, if you can believe that. 1951. Yeah, it was public access. And we used to be on at 2:30 in the morning.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the very first show we ever did was with John Simon the late, very mean critic for New York Magazine, and Elizabeth I. McCann, who just died a couple of weeks ago, sadly.
Yep.
And John was doing his best Dracula imitation. The theater is terrible these days. And Liz, God love her, was picking her nose and trying to remember a show she saw the other night that she kept calling Crazy for Me. Crazy for Me. It's crazy. They put on these old...
And weren't you, at one point, didn't you work for Liz?
I did, yeah. No, I did. Absolutely, yeah. My first job in the theater was Liz McCann's summer intern.
Oh, wow.
I can tell the story now because Liz
Please.
is no longer with us. But my very first professional, if you will, writing assignment came from Liz McCann. She, at the time, was also running the Big Apple Circus, and the Los Angeles Times commissioned her to write an article for their Sunday magazine about the confluence of the theater and the circus. And they rejected Liz's article. And so the office manager said, you're a Columbia history major, rewrite it. So I don't know much about the circus. So I went to the Lincoln Center Library and I took out a couple of books on the circus and I started reading them. I thought, geez, this sounds familiar. These passages I've read before. Liz had just lifted them.
No.
I just dropped them, stitched them together and sent them in. So I went home and I had a weekend and I completely rewrote this whole thing about the circus and the theater. They sent it in and the LA Times accepted it for publication under Liz McCann's byline. I wrote the entire thing under her byline. And of course, Liz didn't give me any money. The office manager felt so guilty. She took $25 out of petty cash and paid me. And that was my first professional writing job.
One of the things I love about you is that you've really done all media. You've been a writer of, as we said, columns, but also books. You've been on television, you've been on radio. Do you like all the media? Do you have a preference? Do you just like variety and bouncing around from one to the other?
The one that pays me the most is the one I like the best. And right now it's radio. Although I just finished a piece on Hugh Jackman for Vanity Fair, and the payday there is not too bad. But I just wanted one quick note about Theater Talk.
Yeah.
When we were really scrappy and we were in some crazy studios. And in one studio that we had, they were always filming. And now this is back in the 90s before internet porn. But everybody was doing phone sex. And
and those commercials and things.
And so we would go into this studio. And I remember once we had Edward Albee coming on. And I walked into the studio and there was this naked woman tangled up in a phone cord, coked out of her mind, rolling around saying, call 999, 999. And I was like, you have to get out of this bed because Albee is coming here. And she's like, oh. I said, get out. Got her out just in time before Edward came in. So, he wouldn't have been bothered by her because, frankly, that would not have been his kind of thing.
But he would have laughed, probably.
He would have. I think Edward would have found the humor and all that. So, yeah. But we had some crazy times back in those days.
I just read the 2 books that have come out about Elaine Stritch. And then I guess there's a third one that I have to read that sounds kind of dishy. But you come up quite a bit, and I know from watching on Theater Talk, you were one of her favorite people to interview her. And you had a very special rapport. Can you talk a little bit about her?
Yeah, we got to be friendly. It was actually through Theater Talk. This was when Elaine's career had kind of crested. And I was I think it was a benefit for Second Stage. And this was back in the days when the only jobs Elaine could get was she would sing The Ladies Who Lunch at every benefit.
Of course.
That's all she did. And I was walking down the aisle, and here she comes bounding up in her leotards and her white pork pie hat. And she said, kid, I love that show of yours. I want to be on it.
Wow.
I said, well, Miss Stritch, we'd love to have you on anytime. She said, I'm at the Carlisle. Call me. Okay. So I called her the next day. Oh, yeah, I'm at the Carlisle. Call me. Not before 2 in the afternoon. So 2:15, I call her. And she said, yeah. I want to come on the show. I need a few things. Okay. I need a car and driver for 2 days. I need hair and makeup at Bergdorf's. And you're going to have to pick up my suite at the Carlisle for a week. I said, Elaine, it's PBS. We don't have any money. And she said, let me see what I can do. An hour later, she calls back. She said she was making a movie for Paramount. She said, I got Paramount to pick up everything. You're off the hook. And then she showed up and she said, now I need some receipts. the studio. She said, "You got to fill in these receipts for me for tax purposes." I mean, I am implicated in one of the biggest tax scams of all time with Elaine Stritch. I hope the IRS isn't listening. I'm signing her receipts, and she said, "Want me to sign some receipts for you too? This is great. It works. They never check." So at some point, the IRS could come after me for some Elaine Stritch. My name is on the bills. But she was one of the kind. We always got along. She always felt that I was somebody who, because I could be a little controversial back in those days, but she felt I was someone who told the truth about the theater. And as she would say, and all that charming people in it. And she liked that about me. And she and I, we just had chemistry. I mean, I used to take her out to dinner. Always had to pay, of course, because she was the cheapest broad on the planet. She would order not one meal, but she'd order 2 or 3 meals because she said, "I'm diabetic and I might have an attack in the middle of the night." So you'd pay for 3 meals for Elaine, you know. But we always had a good time. And she once said to me, she said, "Kid, if I were 20 years younger and you were 20 years older, we'd be putting up the jam together." This great expression that nobody has used since 1940, I tell you.
Since they put up jam.
Since they put up jam, exactly. So.
And I don't see Elaine Stritch putting up jam really at all.
The last time I saw her, I went to visit her. It was before she moved back to the bosom of her loving family from the Midwest, whose name she was unfamiliar with, because she wasn't in touch with any of them for 35 years. She was at the Carlisle, and the room, as she said, looking like a nursing home around here because all the bills were out, and she had some stuff installed in the bathroom. And she got a fruit basket from Alec Baldwin. And she looked at it and she said, "I hate this shit." And she just started taking the pears out and throwing them across the room. "Who needs pears from Alec Baldwin?" Boom, hit the wall.
Oh, I could hear Elaine Stritch stories forever. I mean, the books are both very good. I always like seeing different people's point of view on the same subject, sometimes about the same event, to see where they intersect and where they're clearly divergent.
One thing quickly I'll say about Elaine, and it's in the book Singular Sensation, because I took some time out of a chapter about Edward Albee, and one of the comebacks that Elaine had before she did her great show at Liberty was she was in the revival of A Delicate Balance at Lincoln Center. But she was very difficult. I mean, George Grizzard hated her, absolutely hated her. Because, Elaine, she futzes around, the attention's all about her. But Andre Bishop, who produced the revival, he explained to me, he said, I cut her a lot of slack, and so did Albee, so did Edward, because he knew her well. She was sober at this point. She'd been a big drunk for much of her life. But she was playing in A Delicate Balance. She was playing Claire, who's an alcoholic and a chain smoker. And Elaine had given up both cigarettes and alcohol. But every night she had to put herself back in that mentality, in that mindset, back to those days when all she did was grab a bottle of vodka and smoke. And that Andre, who's a very sensitive person, could tell was the thing that was making her scared and insecure.
Yeah, George said something like that in one of the books where he talked about how impossible she was. And he said, but I'm paraphrasing, but it was something like, if I think she's impossible, imagine being her.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at one point he was so fed up with her, the curtain came down when they were taking their bows and he slugged her. And we ran to her dressing room, we got her curling iron and chased him around trying to hit him with a curling iron. As Andre said to me in the book, he said, the only time you were safe in that theater when the curtain was up. As soon as it came down. But as he said, when the curtain was up, they gave some of the greatest performances any of us have ever seen in the theater. It was a remarkable revival.
Oh, and again, what was so interesting about her in that is regardless of who was speaking, you couldn't take your eyes off of her, which of course is that great actress trick. But
oh yeah, believe me, she had that trick mastered for years. She stole. I saw her all the time. I saw her steal scenes right out from everybody else. Frank Langella once said, I will never work with Elaine Stritch. But Frank said, I'm the greatest scene stealer of all time. Until I met her, she beats me. I'm not working with her.
Michael, I'm putting you backstage and we'll bring you back out with everyone else. Thank you, Michael. All right, our next guest is because Michael Riedel wanted to speak with him. And of course, I can never get tired of speaking with the fabulous Bruce Vilanch in mid-belch. Was that a belch?
No, that was a fart. But let's not split hairs.
How are you, my love?
Speaking of splitting hairs, I'm carrying on. I'm loving all of this. Were you quoting George Chakiris in that his book?
No, it was George Krizak.
George has written a book actually with a friend of mine, Lindsay Harrison, and and he talks about doing company with Stritch when he went in after Larry Kurt, and then they toured, and he said actually the same thing. He said his compassion was, I couldn't imagine what it'd be like to be her.
Wow.
All of this insanity going on, and to get out there and just have. And so he was a huge fan of hers when they were. He was drinking at the time, and they would go out and they would drink. They were in America, and he did London with her, I think, briefly. Anyway, I thought maybe you'd read that. That's the other.
Well, I've got that book sitting here, which I haven't read, and I want to have him on as well.
There is. Well, good luck with that. He's.
What is happening?
There's my face. Oh my
That's God.
It. He's very reticent. Really, he's one of the great sides.
Yes, well, I spoke with
out of the glasses there. I'll just look down and have a lot of.
That's okay. You're fabulous.
I'm fabulous. What can I tell you?
So what's interesting, you and I were just talking a couple weeks ago that you were supposed to be down in Florida next week.
Yes, I was supposed to do Thanksgiving weekend at a new theater called The Savor.
Yes.
In Fort Lauderdale. And apparently it failed a building inspection, which I did not think was possible in Florida. They inspect those buildings? Really? And then they fall down anyway? So I wasn't sure. I thought it'd be a ploy, but they pushed the season back, and I'm going to do it March 12th.
Okay.
So I will be there for spring break, where the boys are.
Oh, thank God. That will be fun. I will make sure I'm there for that. So I was going, I didn't really do your intro, but the intro was Bruce Vilanch has written virtually every witty remark that has come out of someone's mouth for the past 5 decades. And it was the 70s.
I wrote for Stritch, but she was wittier.
Did you get paid by Stritch?
Not by Stritch, no. The longest movie in the world was titled Elaine Stritch Picks Up the Check. Longer than House of Gucci. You sit there for 2 hours and 43 minutes waiting for her to pick up the check. Nish. Never.
So it would, I think
pick it up
you and I...
To you.
I think you and I talked about this, that the first person that you really wrote for and learned how to write in their voice was Bette Midler. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, that's true. I have to give credit. The first person I actually wrote for professionally was Kay Ballard.
Oh.
And a lot of people can say that. Because Kay, like Ed, the job he had was writing for Kay. They were, she harvested new talent. She had a remarkable facility for that. And there's quite a list of people who started with her. But, she was Kay Ballard, and so she had that. I could write to her. With Bette, it was really pretty much at the very beginning, although she had a writer, Bill Hennessy, who actually was not a professional writer. He was the hairdresser at Bergdorf's. And Mr. Gerard, that was his moniker. And he wrote for her, and because I think did some work on Fiddler. She was a Fiddler on the Roof at the time. And then he would go to, he got the job at the Continental Bath. And he was in New York. By that time, I was hooked up with her, but I was in Chicago, writing for Chicago too, pretending I was Michael Riedel. and she, but the Divine Missing was something that Bill Hennessy came up with her at the very beginning. To write for that, but I elaborated on it a lot. I mean, she didn't do any political material at the point. It was all very late 60s gay stuff. And Fire Island, you know, it was, she knew her crowd because that was her only crowd back then. And then as she blossomed and crossed over into a straighter mainstream culture, she began changing. And the Divine Miss M was, we used to say, everything you're afraid your little girl will grow up to be, and your little boy, too. But it was a way for her to mine all of the things that she loved, all the music from the 30s and the 40s. And when that nostalgia craze happened, she was, of course, in the forefront of it because she found the beauty in all that stuff. She found the beauty in a lot of throwaway, a lot of trash, disposable things. I mean, Do You Want to Dance was a little rock song. Do you want to dance? And she turned it into this aching ballad of lust and romance. And all that. She's found that in that song. That's her genius, is to find you. So that was what I was a part of.
You know, one of the things I know about her, and I've talked to her about this, is she loves doing research. She's a big fan of like delving into the forgotten corners, or this was a song that never went anywhere, but let's re-examine it. Is that something you like to do as well?
Well, as she always said, if she wasn't doing this, she'd be a librarian. Their other joke was that I had to go into show business because otherwise I'd be a word processor. I mean, it was one or the other. She was either going to be a hermit or going to be out on stage, shaking her jugs and carrying on. But yeah, I do. I have. There's a certain OCD part of me that likes burrowing in and finding out stuff, and it served me very well when I was a journalist because I was always looking for true facts as opposed to alternate facts. And and still now, you know, now I'm a repository. I'm obsessed with living for me.
You know, one of the things I love about...
I don't know. I'm hoping it doesn't stop.
What I love about you is that you can get into somebody's voice, into their speech pattern, into their vernacular really easily. And I'm curious, is there somebody that you've tried to capture their voice and it just has eluded you?
Well, generally it's people who have no voice. And
well, that's true.
You know, I mean, on the kind of shows that I write, the award shows a lot, you get a lot of actors who have no stage persona. They inhabit a character. I mean, Johnny Depp, there's no, you know, Johnny Depp at the Palace has never happened. So, and so when he would come on to the Oscars, we have to find a character for him, and that was difficult. The good news is that you can write about the category, and they can just do that about the category. But doing these things, he discovered that, and with talk shows, he discovered that you have to have some kind of a persona. And he landed on a persona that's somewhere between Hunter Thompson and Captain Jack Sparrow. And that's who he does when he goes on talk shows or award shows, any of those. So those people are. Keanu Reeves is hard to write for because we had a disastrous thing on the Oscars where we tried to do a Bill and Ted, and he gave it all he could. He played the character, but it's bad. I'm still apologizing. Fruit basket. It's hard, you know. I have a facility for it, and I mean it's there for me to mine most of them. If a playwright or a screenwriter has to create all of that stuff
from scratch,
and so when I'm doing that, it's a much more difficult job, and it's
really
less fun because you have nobody to do it with unless you're walking around. You know, if you're Patrick Dennis and you're walking around with Auntie Mame in your head, you're having a very good time. But it's, you know, it's if you're not right, if you're writing the Ted Bundy story. Well, there you have Ted Bundy. You can. But anyway.
Oh, Bruce, your audio is coming in and out. It's garbling a bit. I'm gonna, you know what I'm gonna do when I go to Charles now? I'm gonna kick you out of the studio. If you can log back in, maybe we'll have better luck. Okay. Thank you, my love. Oh, but what I was just, before I let you go, I just want to finish this thing, is I've done a lot of, I have a lot of friends who are comedians, and I will see their acts, and a lot of times we'll give notes and what works, what doesn't, what could be expounded upon, what can be cut. And one of the most frustrating things for me is I'm like, that's a great joke, but it's not your joke. It's not in your voice, or it doesn't work for you. And I'm sure you've come up with this, which this is hysterical, this is gold, but this person couldn't pull it off.
Yes, that's absolutely true. A lot of times that happened on Hollywood Squares.
Really?
And we would have people who we would give them a joke because we were trying to do a comedy show. And, and sometimes it worked, and sometimes if they were unaccustomed to being humorous, or if we just didn't get it in their vernacular, it would just kind of stick. And I wish I could give an example of stuff like that.
No, I'm sure we all know.
All out, and therapy has managed to. The
Bruce,
deal.
All right, Bruce, I'm going to put you backstage. We'll log back in, and we'll have you with everybody. Thank you, darling. All right, and now, of course, I think he's one of the most frequent guests on Billy Masters Live. Charles Busch is a legendary playwright, performer. His latest film, The Sixth Reel, has swept the film festival circuit, and it is soon to be released commercially. We will talk a little bit about it with my darling Charles Busch.
Well, hello, darling.
Oh, how are you? Another Thanksgiving almost.
Yeah.
I was telling them at the beginning how we shared Thanksgiving together last year.
We did? What did we do?
We did a show because everyone was just sitting home and couldn't travel.
That's right.
So it was one of those impromptu shows. I see you, Bruce. Thank you. So I want people to know about the Sixth Reel, which, of course, there you are in many, many, many guises. But one picture, which, of course, is not an official picture, and it's somewhat of a plot point, but I just want to ask you, at this point, right, I know. Yeah, anyway, I want to ask you about this.
Oh, my.
My. What is it like to be in bed with Tim Daly?
Well, I have to say, in my brief film career, I've had love scenes with Jason Priestley, Thomas Gibson, and now Tim Daly. That's pretty good.
That's not bad. Well, you are writing them for yourself.
Yeah, that's true. And Tim is just a wonderful fellow. And it was the very first day. I'd only met him once very briefly and years ago. And the first day he shows up on the set, he has to, get into bed with me. I felt like Mae West and Sextet. I was like, come on in, honey. And we were shot this movie a year ago, last October, at the height of COVID, before there was a vaccine. Right. And with so many protocols in place, I think we might have been really one of the very first TV or film projects that SAG approved. Mm-hmm. And so it was crazy. But, when we finished, there were about 80 people involved, with cast and crew, and no one got sick.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it could be done. We were also, we shot the whole thing, almost the whole movie, except for 5 days in New York City. But most was shot on a soundstage. It was like being at MGM in 1932. And we were all sequestered. So we were, when we weren't in the shooting, we were all staying in the same strange hotel where we couldn't see anybody. So we really were in a bubble. And
And in what period of time? How long did it take?
Oh, we shot this thing so fast, honey. I mean, shorter than I'm going to be on than I was waiting for you just now. It was 15 days.
Wow.
But I'll give away the plot because, nobody's going to remember in an hour what we talked about. But in the movie, Julie Halston, my longtime comedy partner, is co-stars in the film with me. And Tim Daly ends up seducing both of us. And so the first day he showed up, he got in bed with me. And, and he's a very straight guy. He's with Taya Leone, I think is his his wife. I don't know. But, he's just good-natured, wonderful fellow. And he's just so sweet. And I just had such a good time with him. And it was, I guess you could say it's the closest I've had to sex in so many years, even though it was just totally platonic. And then a few days later, he had to get into bed with Julie, and I got kind of jealous.
As you should.
I just got jealous, and I was co-director as well with my longtime colleague
Carl
Andrews. So at one point, as director, I felt compelled between takes to go over to the bed and whisper to Julie, darling, it's best not to get too sexy. Just keep it for comedy. Play it for comedy.
And you gave her a little bit more interaction, shall we say, with him than you got.
Yeah, a little bit more. Yeah, but anyway, he's a very smart guy, and we the part was a little underwritten in the script, and when I first read it, it was a little bit sort of romantic feed, kind of thing, and he said that he had some suggestions, and of course, it strikes terror in a writer's heart. What if they're bad, and yet you have to try to, you don't want to alienate that person, and you have to somehow navigate this. Fortunately, he's very intelligent, and every single suggestion he had really improved each scene. So,
and you're also very open to collaboration. I know that in your early days, certainly, everybody sort of brought things to you, and you wrote to them.
No.
Oh, I thought you wrote for people's characters specifically.
I wrote for them, but they didn't suggest anything.
But it was sort of crafted around them.
Yes, but that's different from people.
A plot point.
No, it's different from people actually making a suggestion. Or me saying.
Do you take suggestions well?
I don't take personal criticism well at all. Not at all. No, but yeah, I take a good suggestion. Yeah, you'd be stupid not to. In the case of my old theater company, each person, and that was just created because they were just friends of mine from different places of my life, and they were the only ones who had agreed to put on a show in this strange bar, in a scary neighborhood. But what just was, maybe it says something about the people I know, that each one of them had a big and rather outlandish personality. And as Bruce was saying, each one of I used to call it their trip, that thing about them that's eccentric and fun. And so like Julie Halston, who was not really pursuing an acting career when I found her. She was a job as a corporate librarian on Wall Street, but she talked with this, Comac accent, and she would just, have this kind of delivery, and she just, when you would chat with her, she would kind of become sort of a 1960s talk show hostess. And Charles, thoughts and reflections upon the death of Marvin Gaye. That's how she would talk to you. So I was so intrigued and enraptured with that I would somehow try to put it into the character of the Dowager Empress Aunt Vulva in ancient Byzantium. And each person in the company was like that. So I was so fortunate that I could just mine from them. But that's a little different from them actually saying, this is what I do, and I'd like you to use that. They were just delighted. And in each case, really, I think they were all so thrilled to play with me and to have me write these parts. I guess I always saw it as a gift that I could give someone, is come up with when you know someone and talk, you hear about their certain fantasies that they've had, and then figure, like Julie, for instance, she and I, one of the things we had in common when we first met was we both had this obsession growing up as teenagers with Maud London and the Beatles and Carnaby Street and Julie Christie. And so Julie always had a bit of a fantasy growing up in Comac, Long Island, as being a London Dolly Bird, Judy Geeson or that sort of thing. And so when we were at the Limbo Lounge, one of the little plays I wrote was a spoof or homage to Maud London, and she got to play a 60s fashion model. And that was that was kind of my gift to give her, to a way of seeing herself that meant something. And so I took it really seriously over the next 7 years with these same people. What would be nice to do? And sometimes with some of the boys, like my friend Andy Halliday, who could play, was wonderful playing these very outrageous female characters in drag. But I knew that he also he was a cute boy, and he had
Yes.
worked hard on his body, and so for every drag role where he played the bizarre female prison warden, I would also write another part where he could be the cute waiter, or So I loved it. It was a fascinating thing and I still do it to this day. There's a wonderful actress who I've worked with a lot in the last few years named Jennifer Van Dyke, and
she's incredible.
She's just wonderful, and she has a kind of a Katharine Hepburn kind of androgyny to her in life, and so I had never really wrote what these called trouser roles for women before. I wrote a lot of parts for guys to play in drag, but really never the opposite. But with Jennifer, she has that quality so when we did Cleopatra, I had her not only play Octavius Caesar, but also his sister Octavia, and so it's fun to have her play both the different sides of her own persona. So I love that, and I've been doing it for myself, of course, for 40 something years, just trying to know what it is about me that is kind of fun or interesting, and so I've been sort of the Bruce Vilanch to me.
Yeah, but also to a whole score of other people, right? Yeah. Is there anybody who you've thought was such an interesting character as a person that you couldn't ever work into one of your plays that you still want to, that you're like, this is the type of person I'd really like to capture in a play?
Well, it's funny, but Bette Midler, I've been kind of involved with Bette Midler for 20 years on a movie version of my play, The Alger's Wife.
Right.
It's going to happen. It doesn't happen. It does. So, I've had this, somewhat of a relationship with her, and I must say I could write very easily for her. Not what Bruce does, because I could never ever write for like an Oscar show. I can't write jokes, and I just can't do it. But as far as a character in a play or a movie, almost everything I write is apart from Bette Midler and.
I guess since you brought it up, where is Alger's Wife at this point? Is it still in limbo, or?
Yeah, it was all full steam ahead about a year ago.
Wasn't it Bette and Sharon Stone? Was that who was the last one?
And then after that, actually, this big financing company was all set to. We're ready, and then I'm not really in the loop on it, to be quite honest. It sounds kind of nutty, but no. So I don't know really where it stands. It's not dead, but it's very slow moving.
I would like to mention, even though it's not going to help anyone watching this show, that your Christmas performance is coming back this year after missing a year, which I still haven't got to, and now people, it's sold out, I'm sorry to say, but tell people about it. It's at the Theater for the New City, which has been kind of your sort of adopted home for so many years.
Well, really, it's no secret how old I am, but although we don't have to say. I've been the Theater for the New City. I've been involved there since 1980, maybe.
Wow!
They produced my very first play, and I've just it's a wacky place. It's a kind of multiplex for the avant-garde, way down on the Lower East Side, and this remarkable woman, Crystal Field, is the founder of it, and she's still running it with an iron fist, and she's survived everything, and now she's survived COVID, and
thank God.
And she's got she didn't get sick, but her theater survived COVID, and they almost never stopped in a certain sense, and she's somehow got the city to get her an air filtration whatever system, and she's back. So we decided to do Times Square Angel. Had I known, in 1984 when I wrote it, that I was still going to be playing it so many years later, I wouldn't have made the character 24 years old. And then there was a period.
The miracle of the theater.
Well, there was a period where I was self-conscious, and I took out the one line that really made it clear how old she was. And then another decade went by, and I thought, well, now I'm so far beyond this character that why not? And there's a great story about the wonderful French actress Sarah Bernhardt, who played Joan of Arc when she was way in her 60s. And there was a scene, where she's at the tribunal, and they say that the inquisitor says, your name, and she said, Joan, your age, and she just looked straight at the audience, and I think she said 19, and the whole French audience was, "Whoa!" They stood up cheering, It's not quite like that when I say I'm 24, but a little bit. And so yes, we thought so we used to do it as full production. It would run, several weeks in the holiday season, and I did that in 84, 85, 86, 90, 91, and then about 11 years went by and we never did it. And then Carl Andrus came into my life, and we decided to put it on just as a one night stage reading where we hold the books, but we're all dressed up, and we move around, and we have musical numbers, and it's become this strange ritual where not only is it the same cast, but the same people in the audience every year. And a couple of them are Sarah Jessica Parker and Matthew Broderick just have come all these years and bring their children, and we see the kids grow up, and I can't quite understand it personally. I mean, I've never had that experience of seeing something every year, but it really means something to this audience. I think it's partly. I mean, there's a nostalgic quality, of course. It's a story. It's a Christmas story about. It's kind of like a Christmas Carol. It's a Wonderful Life, but it's set in the 40s, and I play a tough nightclub cutie, Irish O'Flanagan, who learns a big lesson, on Christmas night. But I think there's also a nostalgic element for the East Village, which is there, but not quite what it was. And so for a lot of these people who come to the show, I think it's the only time they probably go to Theater of the New City, which is a bit frozen in time. And it's a little bit like catching a glimpse of me in my earliest incarnation when I was performing these shows at the Limbo Lounge, not that far from Theater of the New City. So there's a nostalgic element of the sort of 80s New York, all the Lower East Side, all that I guess works in, and it's very special. I get kind of, there are times this is too much schlepping around. I can't do this anymore. But it's so heartwarming, and just the response, and the fact that it's so, we don't do any advertising at all or post social media, anything. This time we actually did post on social media just to let people know
you put
that
it,
we were back.
And it sold out, I believe, in 90 minutes.
Something like that. Yeah. Well, we also
it was last Wednesday. Well, that's true.
We used to pack in. It was kind of 300 people in a very tiny space, and with no aisles. I mean, it really was not right. And so this year we've limited it to 180, and there'll be actually a center aisle.
Oh wow!
So, yeah. So it's just more sensible. Yeah.
And people, you won't be able to see it. Sorry, I can't tell them. But at some point, maybe they'll immortalize it. At some point,
maybe. I know there's something we've thought about. Oh, like last year there was a thing. Oh, do we do like a Zoom version? But there's just something about the event as an event, and the audience plays just as important a role, really, as the cast at this point, since it's the same people every year. And their response to performers coming on stage who aren't known at all in many cases, and get a huge round of applause when they enter because the audience has seen them for 22 years, one night a year. It's magical. It really is.
Well, I'm glad you're reviving it. I'm sorry you missed 1 year, but you're back. All right, I'm bringing our whole panel on. Let's bring Michael Riedel, Bruce Vilanch.
Hey, Michael.
Okay.
Michael lives in the same neighborhood, but I haven't seen you on the street in a long time.
The last time I saw you, you were making the movie that just came out, and I walked over to say hello to you, and this massive security detail descended on me and said, "Get away! Keep away! Keep away!" I said, "Charles, it's me!" As they were kicking me from the other side of the street.
I told myself, I don't know who that guy is.
Lose him.
Charles, I have to tell you something. This always amused me about your plays. One of your plays that I loved, I think it was from 1991, Red Scare on Sunset. And it was such an interesting play because you actually wrote about the fact that there were really communists in Hollywood. And I think you played a woman in a movie, and the communists are infiltrating the movie. And I remember the reviews were hilarious because a nice liberal place like the New York Times was like, how dare he say that there were really communists in Hollywood? But then in the Wall Street Journal and the John Birch Society, all the conservatives absolutely loved you for saying that there were really communists in Hollywood.
Well, it's so ridiculous. First of all, when I decided to write a comedy about the blacklist period, I couldn't think of anything particularly funny about some poor leftist who's hounded out of their job. But I thought it could be kind of perverse funny if you did it as a right-wing nightmare. And what if everything they, drummed up was actually true? So I played this kind of Loretta Young sort of movie actress who, to her horror, discovers that her husband, her best friend, her houseboy, her director, all in a communist plot. And it had kind of a Rosemary's Baby feel to it. But I assumed, and at the end, with great nobility of purpose, she names names, including her own. And I just assumed that everybody watching it would just know that I'm being tongue-in-cheek. And in a way, I was trying to make some sort of point that the most extreme left and the most extreme right actually believe the same things.
Yeah.
And particularly when it comes to gay people, the extreme right, extreme left don't want to deal with it. So but like the Times, it was frustrating because Frank Rich was supposed to review it, and then I think his mother died, and he couldn't come in. No excuse. And so Mel Gusso covered it, who was a full-time leftist. Of course, he hated it.
I know. But then Donald Lyons, a total right-wing crackpot from the Wall Street Journal, gave you a review and loved it.
Oh, and then get this. I was friends with this wonderful cabaret singer, Mary Claire Herron, who died young. And she was married to Joe Guilford, whose parents, were blacklisted. Yeah. And she saw the show and loved it so much that she somehow brought with her back the entire surviving Hollywood 10. And surprisingly, they didn't care for it. They didn't find it funny.
I'm curious, Bruce, you're in Los Angeles and things have opened up. People have been going to shows. Theater has started to rebloom. Have you gone to things, and what has your experience been with theater in LA?
But I haven't gone to much. I mean, I really hadn't gone to any theater, in 2 years, but I went to Randy Rainbow, who played the Orpheum downtown over the
last week. Yes,
and I went to the opening of Head Over Heels at the Pasadena Playhouse, which they've torn apart and kind of turned into Hal Prince's Candide. They took out all the seats in the orchestra and they put in a dance, what they call a dance floor, but a lot of people stand around, and so we were up like the first row of the mezzanine, looking down, where they've also built scaffolding so that the actors can run past. And in the middle of the orchestra, what was the orchestra pit, there's a stand where they have Lea Delaria, like Tanya the elephant, standing in a circus stand, and she has to do all of her stuff on this. It's kind of bizarre. And the actual stage house is a stadium seating for the rest of the orchestra on the two sides. It's a bizarre spectacle looking. But those have been, nothing else has opened up except, of course, Hamilton. Hamilton came in first, and it's been at the Pantages and remains at the Pantages, and I assume they're selling tickets.
Can I tell you, I am sick of Hamilton, and I'm sick of the Lin-Manuel Miranda. I mean,
John Adams stacked the bed. That's the lyric from Hamilton.
I can't take it anymore. I just can't take it.
I never could. I mean, I found it monotonous and reductive, but it is so. I'm such a minority opinion. I don't even bother when people bring it up, I just say, Don Adams, at the bed.
I mean, to me, to me, it's like they all walk out and they say, "My name is Alexander Hamilton. I was the secretary of the," not a fifth grader. All right. And then I went to see a preview just before. I saw it at the Public Theater and was not a fan. Then I saw a preview just before it opened on Broadway. And I kid you not, I'm sitting there and the audience is, and I love this. I mean, it's all, it's a multiracial cast and all this. Everybody in the audience is the richest white people on the planet.
Because they're the only ones that can afford it.
Oh, yeah.
Right. $1,000 a ticket to see it.
They can afford it, right.
And I'm sitting there and Leslie Odom Jr. walks out and says, "My name is Aaron Burr, sir." And a woman behind me says, "Oh, the rhyming is so brilliant."
Yeah, it's like that.
And I whipped around. I said, "Have you ever heard of Stephen Sondheim?" And I went right back to the but the cult of Lin-Manuel Miranda is out of control.
Well, this brings up something I wanted to mention to you, Michael. When you were on this show last time, we talked about what theater would look like when the coronavirus pandemic was over, and you had a lot of hope that theater prices would go down, that it would lead the way for maybe great visionary producers to bring plays back, to have little theater and just better quality work. Do you see any of that on the horizon?
No, I've seen the future, and the future is that every theater on Broadway is going to be named after Lin-Manuel Miranda. Lin-Manuel Miranda shows in them. So, I do hope plays come back. There are a lot of plays out there now that, frankly, are struggling because the audience for plays is generally an older New York audience, and I know a lot of my older friends who were regular theater goers for all those years. They're a little scared still. They worried about the Delta strain, and a lot of them tell me that we're not ready to go back and sit with 1,500 people. We're going to let the winter play out, see how that goes, and maybe in the spring. But Charles, you know this business, and so do you, Bruce. You let the winter play out with people not showing up, the shows are not going to be able to survive.
Have you gone to theater since things have opened up, and what's been how safe do you feel?
I mean, I feel fine. I'm double vaccinated. I'm going to get a booster shot later this week or next week, I guess. And also, I'm ready to go on with life. I think we can't close everything down again. We just can't. I mean, so many of our friends in this business lost their livelihoods. I mean, Bruce,
sure.
Charles, I kept my radio show going. We're the lucky ones. We've been able to survive. But I'm sure all of you know many people who just had to give it all up and leave the city because they couldn't afford it. So I don't think we can shut it down again. I think people have to get used to the fact that the coronavirus is never going to go away, and it's going to be like the flu. We don't shut down theaters because we have the flu. Every year we're going to get a shot, and we'll go about our lives. You can't close down. You can't close down society again, and it was just devastating for the theater. And the theater's not out of it yet. The ticket prices. They're clawing their way back, but it's very slow, and the ticket
and there's no transparency. No one knows how many tickets anything is selling.
Exactly.
Well, because they're not reporting them anymore.
They're reporting the gross of the
overall gross. Yeah,
the whole street. They're not breaking it down to the other shows. And there are some enterprising people who are going onto the websites every day of the shows and looking to see what seating charts look like. And they're reporting back what's actually selling and what actually isn't selling.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, Charles, since you're on both sides of this because you are a performer and playwright, but you're also a great fan and champion of theater. Where do you come down this? Have you felt comfortable going to anything?
Well, I haven't seen a play since Blossom Time in 1919. I never go to the theater, darling. I try never to go to the theater.
The only play he does is The Tale of the Allergist's Wife.
My last time I was at a show was The Allergist's Wife. No, it's funny, too, because when I was very young, I knew this marvelous old Irish hard-drinking character actor, Jimmy Cahill, and I was so young, and he would, be over at my place, and I'd ask him if he'd seen some show. I never go to the theater. He said, going to the theater is like going to somebody else's half hour. And I appalled at at 22 years old, and I've turned into Jimmy Gale. I never go. I go to the movies occasionally. I always like going to movies on Tuesdays at 11:45
with your sister.
Yeah, with my sister, and so we go. And I've never been in a movie theater with more than 4 people in it.
Really?
One of the things that does concern me, and I don't think the theater people have quite grasped this yet, and I probably fall in this category because, back in the heyday of the theater columnist, I never missed anything. I was at the theater 4 or 5 nights a week, but people have fallen out of the habit. And
that's true.
We forgot how much work it is to actually go to the theater, especially if you live in the suburbs. You now got to drive in. First of all, you're not going to work yet, right? So the office buildings are not full. It was easy if you're working, meet your wife afterward, let's have a drink at Sardi's, go to the theater. But if you're in Larchmont, if you're in Long Island, if you're in New Jersey, you're really going to pile into the car around 5 o'clock to come in.
It's a schlep.
Go to the theater. Yes. It is. But, it really is. And I think people have just gotten out of the habit.
The rule generally is one hit changes everything. That's and Hugh Jackman in The Music Man might be that 4-quadrant audience appeal show that brings things back. And once people do it and they say, okay, we live. And,
what else is here?
But aren't the ticket prices like $600 a ticket or something?
They're insane. I mean, Billy Crystal's, the last row of the balcony to Saturday night is $199.
Man,
the last row of the balcony.
Well, that is just, I'll tell you this. I mean, I did not wish COVID on any one of us, anybody, any industry. But I did have a feeling, and I'm a capitalist, and my friends on Broadway take chances, and I'm delighted when Charles Busch has a Tale of the Algist Wife, and you can make good money. I mean, I'm all for that. But I really thought before COVID things were getting a little obscene. I mean, I came here in the '80s. You could see lend me a tenner, the half-price ticket booth for $25-$30. Now the half-price ticket booth before COVID was $500. The half-price ticket booth was a $500. It was really, I mean, for the theater that you guys knew when you were in New York, and I caught the tail end of, it was open for everybody, and that's what made it fertile and fun. And then it really did become this thing for just the 1%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a friend that just did a London trip, and he went to see a bunch of shows. London is still an affordable city in terms of going to the theater. Now, maybe not the biggest hits, but you can still buy tickets for $40 and get good seats.
Charles, what were you charging for the very first off-Broadway show you did? What was the top ticket price?
I wonder. Probably $2.75. That's a long time ago.
But I mean, it's always when you're comparing stuff in '80s dollars with stuff in 2000. I mean, it's always, the argument is kind of specious because everything has to become inflated.
Yeah. Our
you have to look at that. When Hamilton does $3 million a week, and they are selling the same 1,500 seats that Gwen Verdon sold in Dan Yankee, and and with pulling in 300,000 maybe. I mean, that part of that is inflation. Part of it is also, it started with the producers 20 years ago.
That's right.
Which Michael writes about in his book.
Get a piece of that premium, of that markup that brokers are charging.
Right.
That began dynamic pricing. Dynamic pricing is what the market will bear. And the awful truth is the market for the theater will bear that because it's the 1% that's interested in going to.
Listen, the thing with Hugh Jackman is they don't have any tickets to sell because they sold 30 million before COVID, and they were able to keep that advance because they just kept saying to people, we're going to push it back. Yeah. So they never had to refund anything. So they were sitting on a pile of money. So those tickets were already sold. And because it's Hugh Jackman, everybody was like, I will, whenever I can go to see him, I've already got the ticket, which is golden. I will wait until he opens.
Yeah, but I remember, Michael, you and I talking about the fact that the shows that you thought of as bulletproof might not be bulletproof when theaters reopen because New Yorkers have all seen Chicago and and yet they've marketed it so cleverly that the 25th anniversary, you have to come back and see it again. So even those shows are enduring.
Well, the issue is there's been a lot of publicity for Broadway, and as Bruce points out, they're selling tickets, but you're not going to know exactly at what price point they're selling them. And you have to remember the economic has not changed. You know, the unions did not give anything back for Broadway, and Broadway built itself up on the idea of dynamic pricing, that you could sell a ticket for a show, even a show like Chicago, you could sell for $500 on a Friday or a Saturday night. Sell enough of those tickets, you can afford to pay the union cost that went up and up. They're not selling those tickets at that price now, but they haven't been giving any reduction in their cost structure. So when you hit January, February, and March, and you know, Charles and Bruce, you know, that's always a bit of a struggle for theater, those cold winter months. A lot of shows are going to, I think, are going to fade away. I do have a funny story that Hugh Jackman told me. I put it in this piece I've done a profile for about him for Vanity Fair that's coming out for The Music Man. And when you guys remember when he came back to Broadway with his one-man show, Hugh Jackman back on Broadway, and he played 10 weeks and grossed $20 million. I mean, it was the hottest thing of all time. I think the top ticket maybe back then was $500, but the scalpers were getting $1,000, $1,500 a seat for the orchestra. So one day, Hugh, who used to ride his bike up to work, he would chain his bike up at the end of the block on 44th Street. He was at the Broadhurst. And he's sauntering down the Broadhurst with his sunglasses on, you know, trying to be incognito, which is hard for him because he's 18 feet tall. And this little creepy little guy comes up to him and says, "I've got tickets for Hugh Jackman tonight." And he lowers his sunglasses and he goes, "I am Hugh Jackman, mate." This guy ran.
You know, I think, Michael, you brought up a good point just a minute ago, which is that people will not be quarantined again. And I actually agree with you. And I had this conversation with somebody last week that even if there's another spike, I am very, I'm completely skeptical that people will stay in again. So I agree with you. I think that we have to learn to adapt to this. And I'm curious, for somebody like Charles, you and I talked about that because you're a writer and you're used to being home, you're able to keep creating, but it had to have still gotten to you.
Well, I am a little bit at the times like a less frenzied Emily Dickinson. You know, I do spend a lot of time here with my poetry.
When I describe you, that is how I'm going to describe you from now on.
My needlecraft. You know, sitting at my loom, as Michael well knows. You know, I worked on my memoirs, darling. It's endless. You know, I see it eventually boxed like Proust, you know, in 4 volumes. So I worked very busy on my memoirs. I get very busy, darling. You know, just doing watercolors.
Honestly, I have to be honest with you guys. I didn't mind it that much. First of all, I did not have to sit through a bunch of crappy shows that I had to do for years of my life. But you know what I did? Because I like to exercise every day and do something, but the gyms were all closed. It was getting cold. But what I would do is I would ride my bike all over the city after I finished my show. Then I jump on the bike and I would pick neighborhoods in the city. And I put my architectural guide to New York City in my backpack. And I would pick a neighborhood and I would just explore it because nobody was there. I mean, I rode my bike down to Wall Street the end of March 2020 when everything was shut down. There was not a car in sight. There was not a human being in the Wall Street area. There are amazing buildings. I mean, the Cunard building, no one would ever notice it down there. The Cunard building is gorgeous. And you couldn't get into anything, but I looked through the glass. The lobby of the Cunard building is spectacular. The Standard Oil building across the street, I never knew these things exist. I rode my bike across the Brooklyn Bridge one afternoon. I was the only person on the Brooklyn Bridge.
Jeez.
There's something wonderful in New York City about that. You know, I find, I'm sure for many people living in any city, there's basically a certain path that you always take, or a certain neighborhood where you just always are. And, I live in the West Village, and I see that. And then sometimes I go to Midtown, and for the most part, that's what I see. But once in a while, you find yourself just all of a sudden, 26th Street and 2nd Avenue, and it's like, oh my God, it's like I'm in Bulgaria. It's thing. It's
and Bruce in LA. Bruce, did you go by to the old site of the Brown Derby?
Yeah.
Oh, that would be fun.
I drove to time in LA, and I wanted to make sure the battery didn't die. So every day I would take the car out, and it was on the beach. It was desolation. The homeless were gone. Where'd they go? All of a sudden,
where were they?
I don't know. But I live in Hollywood, and I miss walking out my door and having 7 guys dressed as Spider-Man coming up, saying hello. And
those were the understudies for that show, Michael.
But I drove around a lot, and it didn't look like old Hollywood because so much has been built, but it did look like the back lot on some studio. There was nothing happening anywhere, and it was kind of eerie. Coyote looking around, going, "Where is everybody?
Yeah.
Nobody is there. Where are they all?" So
well, I just went back. I just was back in LA, I guess last month for the first time in a year and a half in my own apartment, which just sort of like a time capsule because I thought I was leaving for a month and it was just all sitting there. But you looked outside now and it looks like nothing has changed. To me, it looks like back. Business as usual.
But a lot of it is because they've been pretty stringent. You do have to show vaccination proof to get into anything indoors. Right. And so once you're indoors and you're wearing a mask, you're fairly confident. Everybody there has been vaccinated, and they're not just telling it to you. They're not signing it on. They have to show you proof. And they haven't faked the vaccination card. All. So,
well, some of them, actually,
you get a feeling of comfort, even though you know that it's the new normal, and it's not for forever.
Yeah.
So that encourages people to go. And of course, it's LA, and so even the coldest night, you're sitting outside eating under a heater. So it's not.
You don't need heaters in LA. Come on,
Charles, it gets cold at night.
The out-of-work actors are taking jobs as heaters.
Charles,
I have a few in my yard now. They can't all walk Lady Gaga's bulldogs. They have to do other things.
Right. That's good. Charles, do you remember, I guess it would have been not this past summer, but the summer of COVID, so 2020.
The summer of COVID,
but they started doing outdoor dining.
Spelling production.
Right. They started doing outdoor dining, and there was that false sense of security that I had in the West Village.
Yeah.
Things were coming back to normal because we're eating outside. It was a beautiful summer of 2020, and you thought, okay, we're getting through this. And then, man, we got slammed again when November.
Delta. Yeah. Yeah, but I must say there's something very charming, certainly in our neighborhood in the West Village, where almost the competition with every restaurant whose
building a shed.
Yeah, whose fellow could be the most glamorous, and it's something very, very charming. I don't know what's going to happen again in the winter. I mean, they have heaters, but still, do people really sit outside in those little huts when it's snowing?
Probably.
It's been but I guess people really do adapt to everything, and we're just getting used. I think we're getting used to this new normal, and
it is what it is. I have to say, though, the pioneers that I really admired this. My girlfriend, now my fiance, Christina, whom you've met, Charles. We decided to get married in COVID because we had nothing else to do. That summer we're both runners, and we would be running around June and July, and all of a sudden you saw all these people together on the West Side Highway in the park there near us, and there were no masks, and you knew these people were not all sheltering in place. But I have to say, and I loved it for it, they were all these gay guys with their shirts off, and they were hanging out, drinking bottles of wine, and they were like, "We are done with this thing." I thought, good for you guys.
Michael, can you tell the story again of when Christina called you? You were skiing someplace like Gstaad or the Dolomites or someplace when you found out about COVID.
Well, I finished my book, which I will plug here. Singular.
Chime in.
Which
Yes,
Bruce,
there it is.
I'm taking. Yeah,
Bruce has.
I'm
Bruce
an
has a
anecdote.
great,
I love it.
Bruce has the best. Charles. Bruce has the best line in the book. My favorite line of all time. I went to the very first preview of Titanic. Remember Maury Eston, Peter Stone's Titanic?
Oh, yes.
And I remember it ran 4 or 5 hours. It was shaping up to be the biggest fiasco of all time. So I got a ticket somehow to see the first preview, and I sit down on my seat, and Bruce is sitting next to me. And we come to the very end of the show after about 7 or 8 hours, I think it was, Bruce. And they were unable to sink the ship at the end for technical reasons. And Bruce turns to me and he says, "Musical about the Titanic, where the ship doesn't sink. That's novel."
One thing when you went in there, you knew how it ended.
I know.
Surprise!
And then Tarantino was saying, he killed Hitler at the movies in Paris. Who knew?
That's what you want in the theater. You want a surprise. Different, new twist to the plot.
There's MacGuffins everywhere.
I'm sorry, Billy. What was your question?
The question was when you were skiing someplace and your girlfriend at the time called you to tell you what was going on, because you thought that you had finished a book, you were going to turn in your manuscript, and then life would continue.
Yeah, no, I finished the manuscript for the book. I turned it into my editor at Simon & Schuster, and I thought, okay, well, I deserve a little treat. So I took myself skiing in Zermatt, Switzerland.
All right, Zermatt. Okay.
And, I'm zipping along. And the big thing was going to be Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden to win the Democratic primary. That was the big thing, because this is the first week of March 2020.
Right.
And there was this thing called the coronavirus that I was paying no attention to because it was on some ship in Seattle. And I thought, never going to come my way. And then one day, it was the most beautiful day, one of the most beautiful days of my life. And I'm skiing right by the Matterhorn. And you could take the tram all the way up, go over the border into northern Italy. I spent the day skiing in Italy. I was at this fabulous restaurant on the slopes, and I had a glass of white wine, and I took a picture of the wine with a Matterhorn in the background, and I sent it to Christina, and I said, "I'm in Italy." And she said, "Where?" I said, "I just skied over the border. I'm in northern Italy." She said, "Do you have any clue what's going on?" It was spiking. It was spiking in northern Italy. I said no. She said, "Get out of there."
Right. Italy was ground zero at that moment.
It's going to take some time. And guys, I kid you not, 2 days later, Cervinia, where I was, the resort, completely shut down because they had a massive outbreak of COVID.
Wow.
But I mean, I flew home on a plane. Nobody had masks on. We were kind of laughing and joking about it. I got back here to New York, March 10th. I got back here.
Right.
And I'm thinking, what's going on here? Come on, let's not be. And then all of a sudden, the governor, I think it was March 12th, Charles, where he announced he was shutting down everything. Remember, we all thought 2 weeks. Didn't you think 2 weeks? I thought 2 weeks, Tom.
Absolutely.
I was doing a play, The Confession of Lily Dare, and fortunately our limited run ended March 5th. I mean, just the nick of time. Yeah.
Right.
And I had come back to Boston. Oh, go ahead, Charles. Go ahead.
I'll just tell you kind of a funny story was that the next week, I was being honored at this cabaret award thing called the Bistro Awards. And I walked in, it was like in a cabaret setting, and Tova Feldschuh was sitting at a table near the entrance. And I sort of know her, but, I didn't really feel like saying hello. So I moved kind of fast. And I saw her across the room. So I said, "Hi, Tova." And I sat in my seat. Well, wouldn't you know, a few weeks later, she came down with COVID and everybody in her table got sick. So if I had gone over, if I'd felt a little more warmer toward her,
There you go.
she would have died.
That's right.
Before we run out,
You're like the stories of people who missed the train to the Titanic. There's actually a book full of that shit. People who almost were on the Titanic.
I have to tell you my favorite Tova Feldschuh story, because we should all have Tova Feldschuh stories.
As we should.
So Tova's on Broadway. She's doing Golda's Balcony. Remember when she was playing Golda Meir?
Yeah,
Of course.
It was Golda's Balcony. We used to call it Tova's Annuity because you knew she was
Right.
all over the place. So September 11th hits. Okay, knocked down. A week later, I'm walking down 44th Street because she's at the Golden Theater. There's nobody around. I mean, it was a week after the thing, but Broadway had come back that Thursday, the 13th, so people were going to shows, but it was pretty quiet in Times Square though. And I'm walking down. I think it was from Angus McIndoe's restaurant. So I'm walking down the street, and all of a sudden I see these two big security bodyguards with all these things on, and they come out of the Golden Theater and they look up and down the street. Check, check, all clear, all clear. Cars there, all clear. Tova comes running out into the car. She felt she would be a terrorist target
Because she was playing Golda.
Playing Golda Meir.
Well, for many reasons. Actually, you gotta love an actress. In The Allergist's Wife, at that point, Valerie Harper was in the show, and Michelle Lee was in the cast. And so when the theaters were coming back, Valerie asked me if I'd write her a little speech to say in the curtain call, just welcoming people back to New York and the theater. And so, I took that rather seriously. And so I wrote the speech for her. But then Michelle Lee, she wanted to make a speech too. Said,
Of course she did.
Maybe it's best, if just Valerie makes a speech. Oh, really? So I went that night to see what was, this big event. The theater returns to New York. And there was a very old lady, and Cheryl Bernheim played the mother. It was on a walker, little lady.
She was fabulous.
And so, anyway, Valerie, curtain call, she makes her speech, and it's very emotional. And the audience is so happy to hear Rhoda welcoming them back to New York. And just as they start to applause, Michelle stops them. And we thought, what is she going to do? And she said, I think you should all know that today is Cheryl Bernheim's 80th birthday.
Wow.
I mean, you gotta love an actress, right?
That's almost as good as Debbie Reynolds dying the day after Carrie. The ultimate upstaging.
Well, it's all about who gets final bow.
You're going to do that, are you? I'll show you. Was their whole relationship defined in that one?
Yeah.
Well, while we're talking about death, I think that is the end of the show. Guys, I want to thank you all for being here. This has been so much fun. I could do this forever with you. My special guests, Bruce Vilanch, Michael Riedel, Charles Busch. Thank you all so much for being here. If you hang around, we can talk a little more, but I do have to end the show. Bye, guys. And everyone else out there, thank you for watching Billy Masters Live. Next week, you've got the week off. Have a Thanksgiving. Have a lovely holiday. And we will see you the week after. I don't have my schedule in front of me, so I have no idea who's here. Is it Darlene Love? It might be. Nobody's telling me anything backstage. Anyway, thank you. Have a great Thanksgiving, and we will talk in 2 weeks. Bye, guys. And remember, this was Billy Masters Live. God, I always forget my own outro. If we're here, we're live. Bye.